All right, welcome back to another interview here at React Europe. Today I'm actually having the honor of interviewing a coworker, so it's pretty cool. So Richard Threlkeld is joining us. So welcome to the interview.
Thanks, Nader. Welcome, everyone.
So can you kind of give us an introduction of yourself and what you do right now?
Sure. So I work for AWS Mobile. I was part of the team that started AWS Amplify and AWS AppSync. Prior to that, I worked in the field for AWS as a mobile engineer, helping large organizations essentially build all the stuff that we try to automate today and make simple in some of these tools in their environments. For that, I worked for Motorola and Qualcomm and did a lot of like peer-to-peer networking and things like that.
Okay, cool. So yeah, what your talk was on today was having to do with security and working with doing things with ID tokens and access tokens and the whole mechanism around authentication from the client to a secure backend. So can you kind of give us an overview of what you talked about at the conference?
Sure. Essentially, I broke the talk into a few key things. One was just kind of how authentication or proving who you are works in mobile and web apps, especially with a focus because we're at React Europe on React and React Native. So things like using Cognito user pools or any user directory for signing in with storing your user information there, or some of the things that are popular nowadays like social sign-in through like OAuth flows and federation. As well as then I went into the authorization process, which we have two main mechanisms to do this. We have JWT tokens that people vend, and then they do signing validation or HMAC-based authorization using like AWS SigV4. So those are the first pieces. But then I tried to pivot the talk and give customers some more information around what GraphQL brings to the table, right? So securing your APIs, even doing some things with object storage, because GraphQL gives us all the common patterns around data fetching and benefits, but it gives us some benefits that we need to talk about more around fine-grained access control to your resources.
Okay, cool. Yeah, the talk was really in depth. It's really eye-opening to kind of learn about a lot of the stuff that goes on under the hood. So since a lot of people maybe haven't heard of Amplify and AppSync, do you want to kind of give an overview of what Amplify is, what AppSync is, and how AppSync fits into the picture?
Yeah. Sure. So Amplify is a client framework. There's also Amplify as a service, and that is essentially a CI/CD tool for web hosting. But the client framework is comprised of three things. So it started as just a JavaScript library, but we've now expanded it so it's client libraries for all of the support from AWS Mobile. So JavaScript across the frameworks like React, React Native, Angular, Ionic, Vue. Then there's UI components that give customers an easy way of importing this library and then like presenting not only default UI things like an authentication component or an HOC into their app, but allow them to have some customization even on native. And then the other piece is, the third piece is what we call our CLI tool chain. So the CLI is essentially an automation tool. In fact, Kurt that we work with, he kind of compares it to a back-end infrastructure team in your terminal. And it allows you to automate all of the simple tasks, but then use what we call some tools inside of there, such as an automatic query generator for GraphQL endpoints, as well as what we call as the GraphQL transformer, that you can do your data modeling straight in the CLI, like you just add a GraphQL type and you give it some annotations, so GraphQL directives like @auth, @model, @searchable to stream data over to Elasticsearch cluster, @version to add some nice version checks on there, some other things that we're adding here in the future as well. And the idea is that this client framework, it's open source, so the default implementations are AWS, but anybody can contribute to it. And we give these declarative abstractions because the implementation can be changed at any time. So you can mix and match with AWS structures. And then we have a philosophy of giving escape patches so that anything on the high level that can't be tackled, people can always escape down to the lower level primitives and do some extra things themselves.
Yeah, I think those escape hatches are especially important when you're working with something like this, where you want to be able to do a lot of things at a high level, abstract away a lot of things, but you still want to give people the opportunity to kind of dig in and do custom things so they're not completely tied into what we've done so far. They can kind of get out of there and do their own things that they need to do to kind of at the end of the day just get everything done and at the most efficient way as possible. So So with Amplify, we've been seeing a lot of growth, like in AppSync. A lot of people are interested in that. A lot of questions around AppSync and GraphQL. Can you kind of give a like a 5-minute overview or a quick elevator pitch of AppSync and what people are using it for and what kind of why we built it?
Yeah. So like anything at AWS, we start at customers first and work backwards from there. It's interesting. When we started this a few years ago, really, we launched 2 years ago. We launched 2 years ago at reInvent in 2017, but we were thinking about this problem before that. And like anything else, like we want to start with the customer use cases and work backwards from there. And we did a lot of interviews. Like I myself, I was an engineer in the field working on site. And it wasn't necessarily GraphQL that we first wanted to launch, like a managed GraphQL service. We're trying to really tackle like real-time and offline data for customers. And as we were like building this, and a lot of front-end, mobile, and web engineers, but just engineers as a whole, even full stack with serverless, there's a lot of things they don't want to tackle, or should just be built in, such as authentication flows going straight through to your backend, or connecting a real-time WebSocket up to your client to get updates. And as we were working through this, we wanted to build a platform that people could start at their own level. Like let's say you were in the garage and building the next social media platform, and you don't know if it's going to take off. And if it does take off, do you really want to tear down your entire backend and rebuild it? So similar to those escape hatch concepts, we wanted to allow customers to graduate as their business expanded and still start really low cost, and then have a flexible model to where they could change their data sources or implementations later. And GraphQL was a natural evolution of that, because we have in AppSync, which it ended up being a managed GraphQL service, but it does much more than that, including all sorts of built-in authorization modes and enhancements around doing data fetching and offline modes. And you could imagine, like, I could just use this GraphQL model transformer, or go into the console and I can import a DynamoDB table and build a GraphQL schema from that. Or I could build one from scratch, or I could use this modeling tool to build it all up. And our default implementation is DynamoDB, but you can switch that over to use Aurora with RDS. You could use just a generic HTTP resolver. You can use Elasticsearch and grow from there. So we had certain concepts around allowing people to have a flexible model that was really targeted for mobile and web devices, but still wanted to layer on the AWS best practices around distributed systems, security, authentication, and authorization.
Right. Okay, awesome. I know one of the things that a lot of people are using GraphQL for, and AppSync in particular, as an API gateway kind of thing, where they can kind of bring in AppSync and then have a consistent client across all of their microservices, all of their data sources, even existing REST APIs that they've kind of built before. They kind of want to start with GraphQL, but they don't know where to start. One of the things that I'm really happy about that I've been playing around a lot with lately are the HTTP resolvers. So you can essentially just kind of bring in your REST APIs, put them in front of a GraphQL endpoint, and start working with GraphQL on the client without having to rewrite any backend code at all, really. And one of the things that makes that super easy is you really can kind of just create the AppSync API, and it's there, it's serverless in the sense that that you don't have to kind of like create it, deploy it, manage it, patch the servers, and doing all that stuff. So it's kind of a really easy way to get up and running with GraphQL if you're interested in that. So, so what's your favorite part about the conference so far before we wrap it up?
I had a very excellent quiche with salmon for lunch.
Oh, nice.
I really like the food. I also really enjoyed Jared's talk on the keynote yesterday around React Suspense. I thought that was. I'm excited to see where the API goes, but the fundamental techniques of where developers don't need to worry about async data fetching and re-renders and so forth, I think is pretty game changing.
Agreed. That was one of my favorite talks too. Okay, well, thanks for coming and talking to us. Let's get up and go hang out and check out more of the conference.
Yeah, thanks.